One of the benefits of Essence is that it can help a team whether or not you're using a particular practice. It's agnostic of the practices or methods that you're using, so it's independent of them. And one of the best ways to prove that is to take a health check and to use the health check for any team. It's also a good way to start with Essence, especially if you've got a team which is already running, rather than picking practices and trying to work out what to change. Use a health check to see where you are. I'd like to show you how to use that health check using the TeamSpace tool. So what we've got here, if I share my screen, is a team. I've got a particular team room and I'm going to create a new game board. Clicking on the new here, and the one I'm going to pick is called a kernel card health check. So we'll just keep that title. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a health check. Now, if you've watched the Essence introductory videos and you've looked at the one which talks about the Essence standard, you'll probably remember that there's a set of things in the Essence standard called alphas, and part of the Essence kernel, this common ground of Essence. Now we can look at what those alphas are by clicking on the Essence kernel practice down here at the bottom, and we can see there's 7 alphas. The first 2, opportunity and stakeholders, they're all about our customer. The second 2, requirements and software system, well, they're all about our solution. And the final 3, work, way of working, and team, well, they're all about our endeavor, the thing that we're setting out to do. And this is what makes Essence practice and method agnostic at the kernel level, because all these things happen whether or not I'm using Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or Disciplined Agile or anything else. However I'm delivering my value, I've got stakeholders, I have an opportunity, I have requirements in a software system, a way of working, work, and there's a team. And we can use this to find out how we're doing as a team. And this is really useful if you're just bringing Essence into an organization. It's actually really useful at any point if you're midway through a project and you want to just take stock and see where you are. This is a nice way to do it. And what we do is we take those 7 kernels and we use the fact that Essence has checklists and states in order to work out what state our team is in. Now, this one is actually being begun for us, so I'll take you through what the process looks like, and you can see what I mean. The first thing we'd normally do actually is decide, do we want to focus on all 7 at once or not? We might want to just focus on 1 or 2, maybe a color, the yellow ones, to do with the solution, or maybe one that we're worried about. We might be worried perhaps about our team. Yeah, we can see, if I look at team, for example, here's the states teams go through, and maybe I'm worried that I'm not really getting into performing. Or I can decide to look at all 7, and that's okay. Now, if I was running this with a team to begin with, I might set aside an hour. It might need a bit of facilitation. It's easy, as you'll find out in a second, to get lost into the detail. But you can do an assessment of all 7 alphas in less than an hour and get a really good picture of where your team is. You'll see spots where you're strong, you'll see spots where you're weak, and you'll see spots where maybe you think I need some help. And if you do need some help, that's where Essence comes in with the practices, because we can work out which practices help us with which of these alphas we're identifying some weakness with. So how does the game play? There are some instructions here, but I'll walk you through it. So we begin, there's 2 ways to play it. We can play it just with the physical cards like this, and we can use the fact that I can tick this checkpoint and get a record of what's happened. There's another way we can play it, I'll show you later, where you can physically move the cards around the board. But let's start with this one. So I'm going to start with the opportunity. Now, as you can see, these are filled in a bit already, so I'll just undo them so I can talk you through what's happening. Like all games, collaborative with the team, it's good to get everybody involved. So what I'd normally do is say, take it in turns to pick a card, read the checklists, and then get some conversation going in the team as to what we think about the checklists. So let's start with that. So I'll pick my first card, opportunity identified. Has the idea behind the opportunity been identified? Now, we can see that described here. On the right-hand side, if I click on this card, it shows me over here. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a bit of extra detail. If I click this little arrow, and it gives a bit more information. So the idea behind the opportunity identified, what we mean by that is an idea for a way of improving current ways of working, increasing market share, or applying a new or innovative software system has been identified. So this is before I've even got a team started. Do I know what the opportunity that we can address actually is? Now, if I'm doing this mid-project, I'm almost certain that's going to be true. If I'm doing it right at the beginning before I've got a team, maybe it's not. But what's always worth doing is saying, okay, we all agree the idea behind the opportunity is identified. What is it? Does everybody agree with what it is? I'm not getting into psychological safety and leadership and things like that. But even that first question on the card raises quite a lot of questions, because it's often the case that maybe not everybody does understand exactly what opportunity we're pursuing. But we've got our opportunity. Have we got at least one investing stakeholder interested? Let's say yes. Are other stakeholders identified? And again, each one of these questions is very much a placeholder for a conversation. We talk about essence as being a thinking framework. It doesn't tell you all the answers. It doesn't tell you how do you go and get yourself an investing stakeholder? What mechanism do you use to identify all the other stakeholders? It just says, have you got one? Have you identified them? And they're seemingly quite simple, closed questions, but they actually, when you look behind them, there can be a lot of complexity. And having that conversation with teams, are we sure we've identified all the stakeholders? Do we all agree who those stakeholders are? How would we know if we'd missed any? Have we got any stakeholders we've identified that aren't actually stakeholders? Already I've got 4 or 5 questions and I'm just on the third checkbox. So if we've achieved all those 3 things, we can quite confidently say now our opportunity is in the state of identified. We've got something, we're clear about it, we know who cares about it. What's next? Is there a solution needed to address that opportunity? Well, first of all, can we identify a solution? Is our opportunity one that can be solved? So we can tick on solution identified, solution stakeholders needs established, problems and root causes identified, the need for a solution confirmed, and at least one solution is proposed. So at this point, we've got a solution in mind, we've put it forward, we've confirmed we need it. I haven't checked this problems and root causes identified because maybe in this scenario, actually, they hadn't thought about that. They had thought about the other things. So then they'd gone on and said, okay, we've got our solution. What's next? Well, we've got our opportunity value is quantified. We can quantify that in terms of revenue or value or cost savings. And there's some other things here. So we've got solution impact understood, not ticked. System value understood, not ticked. Success criteria is clear, so we know what we will have when we complete, when we've succeeded. And the outcomes are not clear and quantified. So when we've done this health check with this team, even though, as you can see from later on, they've done a lot of work on their requirements. They've done a lot of work on their software system, getting it to demonstrable. But up here, they're not clear on what the impact of their solution is. They're not clear on the problem and root causes that have led to the opportunity being identified. They're not clear on what outcomes and quantification of the outcomes. So what you can start to see here from a health check perspective is we're building up quite a lot of risk. There's quite a lot of things here that if they had discussed those, that might make a difference to what our requirements were, or they might have made a difference to how we chose our architecture. So the point of this game is to go through each of these cards, ticking the things that you're certain of. And if we get to something we're not so certain of, problems and root causes identified, then let's take a little note of that. Let's just say check problems and root causes. And I can take just a post-it note and pop that on the board. Now, the tool lets me be a bit cleverer than that. I can take my post-it note and I can turn it into, by using this icon here, a to-do. So now I've got a to-do list. And if I go and look at my to-dos over on the left here, I can see that check problems and root causes is up there. I can be even more clever because I can click on this element, this opportunity for our customer, and I can actually here create a to-do. If I click a new to-do here, it's actually told me this to-do is about getting our customer opportunity into the state of solution needed. And we can say here what we need to do. So we're going to say here, make sure that we have looked into the root causes and problems. And that becomes a to-do. So again, I can see that to-do over here. And in this case, what it's titled is Get Our Customer Opportunity to Solution Needed. So it's really clear the purpose of that to-do. And if I look at the detail, we can see that we've got a missing checklist, and I've got my note here to describe it. So we've got a really quick and easy way to capture actions and notes as we're going through this game, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. As I'm going through the cards, I can just go in here and add a new to-do. So I said there was two ways to play this game. I'll show you the second way. The way this works is it's about moving cards. So what I'll do is I'll just zoom out a little bit. I'll move this. These are pinned to stop me moving them. So that one is at least. So I'll unpin that and just move these three things out of the way. So in this version of the game, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cards, and they're all pinned in position to stop them being accidentally moved. So I'll physically move them over here. So our cards always start on the right-hand side in this version of the game. And this is the way you would play the game if you're playing physically, with physical cards like these ones. And I pick up the card. So let's just do that. So opportunity identified. So I'll find the opportunity identified card, which is this one. And remember, I said we'd share the duties around the team. So I'll pick this card up and I'll read it, and I'll say, is the idea behind the opportunity identified? The team says, yes, it is, Simon. At least one investing stakeholder is interested. Yes, they are. And if we're not sure what that means, we can just remind ourselves of the extra detail. And other stakeholders identified. Yes, they are. So what we'll do is we'll say, we don't need to tick these. And obviously you might not if you're playing it in person, but I'll just move that over to the left-hand side. So that is now achieved. And I move to the second card. What about the second card? And I can look at what it's doing here in the right, or I can pick up the second card, or rather the next person in the team would pick up the second card, and we decide, is this one achieved? Now this one, we think we're broadly achieved. We've got this missing problem thing, but we'll move that across to the left because we're pretty sure we're beyond that state of being unsure if we need a solution or not. So we take our next one and we move that across. So as we move these cards across, eventually we get to a point where we genuinely aren't complete yet. So this one here, if I look at that one, it says, we've got the solution outlined. We think it's possible. The risks are manageable. It's not necessarily profitable, and we're not sure why we've got it. So we might want to make sure we tick those things. And the last thing I can do is I can look at some of the later ones. So I can look at this one, addressed, and this one, benefit accrued. It might be that it's not the job of my team to prove the benefit is accrued. So I might move that one off to out of scope. So we end up with our board set out like this, and you can imagine there's more. If you've got them all like this, you can see a pattern. The things we've achieved to the left, the things in the middle here are the things that we are working on now, and we might want to prioritize. And the things on the right, what is still to be done. And maybe there's things over here on the out of scope box. So that's a nice way to play it because you've got a bit of physical moving things around. You can easily see a big pattern. Of course, with this version, I can see, even if the cards are static, I can still see based on whether these blocks are solid or not. I can get an impression as to what I've got, and I can see these ones aren't done and so on. And with this model, I've got these little purple tokens. So I complete this one and I move the purple tokens down to say, here's where we're going to prioritize. I'm going to prioritize here because, you know, I've got to do some work on making my requirements usable and getting them out of demonstrable. And I might want to prioritize my opportunity because I've spotted those gaps. And maybe I'll prioritize down here. I've got some gaps down here with my way of working. I'm not doing inspection and adaptation by the look of it. I'm not really adapting it, so I might want to look at that. So when I've completed this game, this might have taken, say, 45 minutes to an hour. I've thought about all those questions. I've ticked yes or no to the boxes. I've used the pattern to decide where I want to focus next. I've probably, on these cards where I'm focusing, created some to-dos, either by writing on post-it notes or maybe using the to-do function on the board itself. And what I've ended up with is a really quick insight into my team, some positive, clear actions forward, and a baseline. So I can come back to this in a month or 2 months, and I can check where I am. A word of warning though before we finish: if I do come back in a month, and let's say, for example, the stakeholders one was in this state, and I come back and I say, well, let's say it was completely ticked. I come back in a month and I think, well, am I going to tick the missing things, or am I going to be looking at this one that hasn't started yet? Yes, the job of the review is to say, have I made further progress than where I was previously? But what's really important is when I come back in 2 months, I've got to double check where I am. I've got to double check that I still have my key stakeholders represented and identified, because if those have changed, that's something I really want to know about. So I shouldn't ignore it. So this gives me a bit of a checklist to say, double check all the things I ticked before are still true, because if they're not, that's a risk. So for example, with this one, and I've seen this quite a lot with stakeholders, at the beginning of the project, you know exactly who your stakeholders are. They're the ones that have been really excited. They've given you their thoughts. They might have given you their money. If you've got a long project, you might be 6 or 8 or 18 months later. In many organizations, some of those key people will have changed. Are the new key people as engaged in your project as the first set of people were? Have they got the same ideas for the opportunity and the value of it? Have they got the same connection? Have they got the same involvement with the project team? Because if they have not, and they're the people that are going to be signing things off or accepting things or approving further iterations of your project, you could have a real problem on your hands. So knowing that they've changed as early as possible is a really good leading indicator that you've got something you need to address. So this is why using state and checklists to measure progress is a really good way to have a leading indicator of problems, but also leading indicator of success. If you can confidently say all those checks we ticked before are all still confidently true, that gives me a good feeling that my project is still well on its way to success. And then I can really focus on those later states and the check boxes that are still not ticked. There's a lot more we could talk about with health checks. This is one example of an Essence health check. It gives us an agnostic view of a team's endeavour, whatever practices or methods they happen to be using, and independent of whether they've been using Essence or not. All those things in those cards still need to be thought about, and it might be they're thought about very briefly and not relevant for this team, but they all must be thought about because they're all important. And this is a very quick way to get a nice view of a team and to continue to keep track of a team's progress.